H1. We don't negotiate with murderers. H1. Part 1. The Summons. The message arrived at 0300 hours, Earth Standard Time, and it did not knock. It pushed through every diplomatic channel at once, the kind of transmission that was designed not to inform, but to overwhelm. Bright headers in 9 alien scripts, official seals from the Galactic Accord Council, priority flags stacked so high they nearly broke the formatting of the receiving terminal. The officer on duty at the United Planetary Authority's Communication Center stared at his screen for a full 10 seconds before he picked up the phone and called his supervisor. By 0500, the message had reached Ambassador Nora Calloway. She was already awake. She usually was at that hour. She sat at the small desk in her apartment in Geneva, drinking black coffee and reading through old trade dispute files from the previous quarter. When her secure terminal lit up with the Accord's 9-pointed seal, she set down her mug, put on her glasses, and read the message 3 times from beginning to end. Then she picked up her coffee again and finished it. The message was, on its surface, a formal diplomatic summons. Humanity was being called to appear before the full Galactic Accord Council at the neutral station of Velkaroth within 14 days. The language was polished and careful, the kind of careful that hides something sharp underneath. Nora had been in diplomacy long enough to read what wasn't written. The Accord was not inviting humanity to a conversation. They were calling humanity to answer for something. She found out what that something was by 6 o'clock in the morning, when Commander Dale Rourke knocked on her office door. Dale was not a tall man, but he had the kind of stillness about him that made rooms feel smaller when he entered. He had served 22 years in the Earth Defense Fleet, spent 4 of them at the Outer Rim watching alien patrol routes, and had been assigned as military attaché to Nora's delegation 6 months prior. He carried a datapad in one hand and a sealed fleet briefing envelope in the other. He did not look alarmed. Dale rarely looked alarmed. That was one of the reasons Nora trusted him. He sat across from her and placed both items on the desk. "The EFS Ardent," he said. Nora nodded slowly. "Tell me." According to the Accord's official filing, a human deep space exploration vessel, the EFS Ardent, operating under the command of Lieutenant Commander Cole Briggs, had crossed into Vethri territorial space 9 days ago and opened fire on a Vethri patrol without warning or provocation. 17 Vethri crew members had been killed. The Ardent had then withdrawn back across the border without rendering any assistance. The Vethri delegation had brought the incident to the Accord Council with a full report, navigation logs, and a formal demand. They wanted 3 things. First, a public apology from the United Planetary Authority, delivered before the full council and broadcast on Accord-wide channels. Second, financial reparations totaling an amount that would quietly cripple 2 of Earth's outer colony development programs. Third, and this was the part that made Nora set down her coffee for the second time, the surrender of Lieutenant Commander Cole Briggs to Vethri legal custody, where he would face prosecution under Vethri military law. Nora knew what Vethri military law meant for a conviction like this. It meant neural suppression, a procedure that left a person alive in every biological sense, but stripped away everything that made them who they were: memory, personality, emotion, thought. It was a sentence that many human legal scholars had called, without hesitation, a form of death, just a slower and crueler one. She looked at Dale. "What do we know about Cole Briggs?" 14 years of service, Dale said. "Clean record. Commendations for the Adara rescue operation 3 years ago. He pulled 42 civilians out of a collapsing station with 1 functioning shuttle. His crew calls him steady. Fleet Command calls him careful." He paused. "He is not the kind of man who shoots first." "No," Nora said. "He isn't." They sat with that for a moment. The Galactic Accord Council was a body of 9 alien civilizations that had been governing interstellar law and commerce for over 400 years. Humanity had been admitted to the Accord 30 years ago, after a decade of negotiations that had required more patience and compromise from Earth than almost any other political effort in human history. Even after joining, humans were viewed by most of the elder species as newcomers at best, impulsive, emotional, technologically promising but culturally raw. The kind of species that was tolerated rather than respected. Nora had heard those assessments her whole career. She had sat through Accord sessions where human proposals were delayed by procedural motions, where human trade applications were buried in committees, where human delegates were spoken over or spoken around as if they weren't in the room. She had learned to breathe through it, to watch, to wait. This, though, was different. This was not bureaucratic friction. This was a trap with teeth. The two of them booked passage to Vel-Karath on the next available diplomatic carrier. The trip would take 4 days through 2 relay jump points. Nora spent the first day reviewing everything she could find about the Ardent's last filed mission report, the Vethri border region, and the composition of the current Accord Council. Dale spent the first day running his own parallel review, pulling whatever Earth fleet could share through secure encrypted channels. On the second day, they compared notes over dinner in the carrier's small common room. What they had was thin. The Ardent had been on a standard deep space survey run, mapping gravitational anomalies along the outer edge of charted human space. It had not been on a combat patrol. It was not a warship, in any meaningful sense. It carried defensive armament, as all Earth fleet vessels did, but its primary purpose was scientific survey. The Vethri border, as officially registered in the Accord's navigation database, was more than 300,000 kilometers from the Ardent's last logged position. "That's a long way to accidentally cross a border," Dale said. "Yes," Nora agreed, and Cole Briggs filed no incident report of his own. "No," she said, because the moment they docked at Relay Station Harrow, the Accord had already frozen the ship's communication access pending the council inquiry. She leaned back in her chair. Someone moved fast. Dale was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup slowly in both hands. "They're expecting us to show up and apologize," he said. "They think we'll weigh the cost of fighting the accusation against the cost of just paying them off and handing over Cole." Nora looked at him steadily. "What would most species do?" "Exactly that." "Then they don't know us very well," she said. Vel-Karath came into view on the third day, a great silver ring of a station hanging in the dark between 3 uninhabited systems, specifically chosen as neutral ground because no single species had ever claimed the surrounding space. It was enormous and deliberately cold in its architecture. Everything about it was designed to remind visitors that they were guests in someone else's framework. Nora stood at the viewport and looked at it for a long time. She was not afraid. She was not angry either. Not yet. What she felt, quietly and clearly, was a kind of focus that she had learned over many years to trust. The same focus she always felt when she knew, before walking into a room, that the people on the other side of the table had already made a mistake. They just didn't know it yet. She picked up her bag, straightened her jacket, and went to prepare for arrival. H1. We don't negotiate with murderers. H2. Part 2. The evidence. Vel-Karath received them the way it received everyone, with indifference. The docking bay smelled of recycled air and metal. Port officials in Accord Gray moved around the terminal with the unhurried efficiency of people who process diplomats every day and were impressed by none of them. Nora and Dale passed through arrival screening without incident, were shown to the human delegation's assigned quarters on Level 7, and were informed that the council session would open in 48 hours. The quarters were fine, clean, functional, and just a few degrees too cold. The Accord's standard setting, calibrated for the comfort of 3 particular species and nobody else. Nora had brought a cardigan. She had been to Velkareth twice before. The first thing she did after unpacking was sit down at the secure terminal and send a priority request back to Earth. She needed them now. And she needed them talking to each other. Admiral Kevin Strauss ran Earth Fleet Command's outer sector operations from a desk in Colorado that he had occupied for 9 years. He was methodical, deeply experienced, and had the particular quality of a man who never wasted words. When Nora's request came through, he pulled his senior staff, cleared his afternoon, and personally called the second person on her list. Dr. Amy Dolan ran the Outer Rim Monitoring Division out of a low-profile facility in New Mexico. She had spent 12 years building a quiet, careful intelligence apparatus that most people inside the UPA didn't fully understand, and most people outside it didn't know existed. Amy was not the kind of person who appeared in news briefings or political discussions. She was the kind of person who found things, quietly, precisely, and without any fanfare whatsoever. Kevin and Amy were on a joint secure channel with Nora within 3 hours of her arrival on Velkareth. Dale sat beside her, listening. Nora laid out the accusation in full, the Vethry's claim, the navigation logs they had submitted, the incident report, the demands. She did not editorialize. She told them what the Council had been given and what the Council expected humanity to do with it. When she finished, Kevin was quiet for a moment. "You want the Ardent's raw archive," he said. "Everything," Nora said. "Unedited. Sensor logs, communication records, navigation data, crew logs. And I need independent verification from the Accord relay buoys in that sector." "The Accord froze the ship's comms," Kevin said, "but they didn't freeze our copies. We have a full mirror of everything the Ardent transmitted before docking at Harrow." He paused. "Give me 4 hours." "You have 3, Nora said. Amy, for her part, said almost nothing during the call. She was already typing. Dale spent the waiting time doing what he did best, which was sitting quietly and thinking. He walked the length of their quarters twice, stood at the narrow viewport for a while, watching Accord ships drift past in the station's outer lane, and then sat down with a physical notepad and wrote out a list of everything about the Vethry's accusation that felt wrong to him. By the time he was done, the list had 11 items on it. He showed it to Nora without comment. She read it, added 2 more items, and handed it back. The data package from Kevin Strauss arrived in 2.5 hours. Amy Dolan's preliminary analysis arrived 20 minutes after that. Nora and Dale sat together at the terminal and went through it line by line. The EFS Ardent sensor logs were clear and complete. On the day of the alleged incident, the ship had been conducting a standard gravitational survey at coordinates that placed it solidly within human-designated space, not at the Vethry border, not anywhere near it. The navigation record was continuous, time-stamped against 3 independent reference points, and showed no crossing of any kind. But there was more. 18 months before the incident, Earth's UPA had filed a formal hazard corridor registration with the Accord Council, as required by Accord law, designating a specific region of outer space as an active hazard zone. The region contained remnants of an old colonial-era conflict, sensor ghosts, debris fields, and a scattering of unrecovered autonomous mines that Earth had flagged for clearance but hadn't yet reached. The filing had been processed, stamped, and entered into the Accord's official navigation registry. Every registered vessel in the Accord was supposed to have that hazard data. The Vethry Patrol had not just entered that corridor. They had gone deep into it. Cole Briggs had seen them coming. His communication officer had transmitted 3 separate warnings on standard Accord band frequency, the recognized emergency channel for hazard zone alerts. The first warning gave the patrol's vessel designation and requested they reverse course. The second warned of active mine density in their current heading. The third was sent 8 seconds before a Vethry ship maneuvered hard to avoid what appeared to be sensor debris and moved directly into a mine cluster. The explosion had come from the mines, not from the Ardent. The Ardent had not fired a single weapon. And then, Cole Briggs had done something that the Vethry's official incident report had not mentioned at all. He had brought the Ardent to within 300 meters of the wreckage, deep inside a live minefield, and his crew had gone out in suits and pulled 6 Vethry survivors from the debris. They had brought them aboard, given them medical care, and transferred them to the nearest Accord medical station 2 days later. 6 people, alive, because Cole Briggs had flown his survey ship into a minefield to save them. Nora read that section of the log twice. She didn't say anything for a moment. They left that part out, Dale said. They left all of it out, she said. Amy Dolan's analysis went one level further. Her team had run a forensic timestamp comparison on the Vethry's official incident report, the one they had submitted to the Accord Council. Incident reports, under Accord protocol, were supposed to be filed within 72 hours of an event, and contained embedded metadata reflecting the time of creation. The Vethry report's metadata told a different story. The core document, underneath its filed timestamp, showed a creation date of 4 days before the incident had occurred. Someone had written the accusation before the event it was accusing Cole Briggs of had even taken place. Dale looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. They planned it, he said. They drove their own ship into that minefield on purpose. Or they at least decided in advance that whatever happened in that corridor, they were going to blame us for it. Yes, Nora said. 17 of their crew died. Yes. He shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, in the particular heavy way of a man who had seen enough of the galaxy to know that power did ugly things, but was still not entirely used to it. Nora closed the files, sat back, and stared at the ceiling for a while. Outside the viewport, Vel'Karath's outer ring slowly rotated against the dark. A dozen alien ships held in their docking lanes, running lights blinking in quiet rhythm. She thought about Cole Briggs, a man with a clean record and a commendation for pulling 42 people out of a collapsing station. A man who had flown a survey ship into a minefield to save the lives of the people who were now trying to have him destroyed. She thought about what the council expected to happen in 48 hours. They expected Nora to walk into that chamber and ask for terms. They expected careful, diplomatic, cautious humanity to calculate the cost of resistance and decide it was cheaper to apologize and sacrifice one man to keep the peace. They had been watching humanity for 30 years, and they still did not understand what they were looking at. Nora got up, went to the small kitchen unit, and made herself another cup of coffee. She stood with it in both hands for a moment, thinking through the shape of what tomorrow needed to look like. Not just the facts, the order of them, the timing, the silences, the moment to speak, and the moment to let a document do the talking instead. She had built cases before. She had walked into rooms where the other side had more leverage, more history, and more allies, and she had walked out with what she came for. But this was something different, in scale. And the thing about a case built on complete, irrefutable, independently verified truth was that you didn't need to be loud. You just needed to be ready. She turned to Dale. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow we go in." Dale looked at her steadily. "You're not nervous at all, are you?" She considered that honestly. "No," she said, "I'm not." He nodded once, as if that confirmed something he had already suspected. Then he went to his room, and Nora sat alone at the terminal with her coffee, going over the files one more time, not because she needed to, but because she believed in being sure. H1. We don't negotiate with murderers. H2. Part 3. The Session. The council chamber of Velkarath had been designed a long time ago by people who understood that architecture was a kind of argument. The room was enormous, large enough to hold 3 Earth sports stadiums and still have space along the edges. The floor was a single polished expanse of pale stone, completely flat and completely open, so that anyone standing on it was visible from every direction. The 9 council delegations sat in tiered seats that rose in a wide arc above the floor level, looking down at whoever stood at the central podium the way mountains look down at a valley. Every surface was smooth and cool. Every light was positioned to illuminate the floor, while keeping the upper tiers in comfortable shadow. It was a room that was very good at making people feel small. Nora Calloway walked into it like she owned the floor. She wore the standard deep blue of the United Planetary Authority's diplomatic service, clean, pressed, no decorations except the small silver pin of the UPA seal on her lapel. Dale walked 2 steps behind her and to her left, dressed in the formal gray of Earthfleet, hands clasped behind his back. 2 junior staff members followed at a distance, carrying data cases. The 9 delegations were already seated. The chamber hummed with the low background noise of translation systems, ventilation, and the quiet shuffling of dozens of alien aides and advisors filling the upper gallery rows. Representatives from species that held no council seats but watched Accord proceedings for their own reasons had filled additional observation sections to capacity. Word had spread, as it always did, that the council was handling a human matter. There was always interest when humanity was involved. At the highest point of the arc, centered above all others, sat the Vethri delegation. High Speaker Zovan Tel was a large figure by any measure, broad-shouldered in the way of his species, dressed in layered ceremonial cloth that was deep red and gold. He had the particular quality of a being who had spent so many decades in positions of authority that he had simply stopped imagining that things would not go the way he wished. He looked down at Nora the way a man looks at a minor problem he has already solved. The session was called to order by the Accord's senior administrative officer, a Darok named Vel Osso, ancient and precise, who had been running council procedures for longer than most of the attending junior staff had been alive. He announced the matter at hand, confirmed that the human delegation was present, and acknowledged the formal summons, and invited the Vethri delegation to restate their grievance for the record. Zovan Tel did so with great care and visible satisfaction. He walked through the accusations slowly, letting the weight of each detail settle before moving to the next. The border crossing, the unprovoked attack, the 17 dead, the alleged failure to render assistance. He spoke with the confidence of a being who had read the script and knew how the scene ended. When he was done, he folded his hands in front of him and looked down at Nora with an expression that was almost sympathetic. "The Accord awaits the human delegation's response," Vel Osso said. Nora stepped to the podium. She set down a single data chip on the podium's surface, pressed it flat, and looked up at the council. "We are going to correct the record," she said. She did not raise her voice. She did not adjust her posture. She spoke the way someone speaks when they do not need the room to believe them, because what they are about to show the room will do that work on its own. The first file she released to the Chamber's shared display system was the complete sensor archive of the EFS Ardent, every second of log data from the 48 hours surrounding the alleged incident. Navigation position, confirmed by 3 independent Accord relay buoys, placing the Ardent deep inside human-designated space at the time of the event. Not near the Vethri border, not anywhere close to it. The data was raw, unedited, and time-stamped against the same universal reference standard that the Accord itself used to adjudicate navigation disputes. The chamber was quiet as the display updated. The second file was the hazard corridor registration, Earth's formal filing with the Accord, submitted and accepted 18 months prior, clearly marking the region where the Vethry Patrol had traveled as an active hazard zone under Accord Registry Code 74 Alpha. The filing showed the processing stamp. It showed the date of acceptance. It showed the signature of the Accord official who had logged it into the navigation database that every registered vessel in the Accord was required to maintain. The third file was the Ardent's communication log. 3 transmissions, on standard Accord emergency frequency, sent in sequence as the Vethry Patrol moved deeper into the hazard corridor. The audio was clear. Cole Briggs's voice was calm and professional on all 3 recordings. On the third one, there was an edge of urgency, the kind that comes not from fear, but from watching something bad happen that you are trying very hard to prevent. 8 seconds after the third transmission, the sensors recorded the explosion. Not from the Ardent's weapon systems, which showed no discharge at any point during the entire incident window. From the mine cluster that the Vethry vessel had moved into. Then Nora released the 4th file. The chamber's display shifted to show the recovery log. Time-stamped documentation of the Ardent moving to within 300 meters of the wreckage, inside the active minefield, to conduct search and rescue operations. 6 Vethry crew members recovered alive. Medical treatment administered aboard the Ardent. Transfer to Accord Medical Station completed 47 hours later. All 6 survivors had been returned to Vethry space through proper Accord channels. It was at this point that the sound in the chamber changed, not dramatically. There was no gasping or shouting. But something shifted in the quality of the silence. It became the silence of people who have just realized that the ground under the conversation is not where they thought it was. Dale watched the upper tiers from his position on the floor. He had learned, over 22 years, to read the body language of beings whose biology was very different from his own. Not perfectly, but well enough. He watched an advisor in the Kethal delegation lean forward and say something quickly to the representative beside her. He watched a Darok council member turn his head and look directly at the Vethry delegation for a long moment before looking away. He watched Zovan Tel's expression go from confident to very still. The 5th file was Amy Dolan's forensic analysis. 1 page, clean and simple. The Vethry's official incident report, the one they had submitted to the Accord Council as evidence of human aggression, contained metadata showing a document creation date 4 days before the incident it described had taken place. Nora let that sit on the display for 10 full seconds without saying anything. Then she looked up. The Ardent did not fire on anyone, she said. A Vethry patrol entered a registered hazard zone that every Accord vessel was required to know about. They ignored 3 formal warnings from our crew. They maneuvered into a mine cluster and destroyed their own ship. 6 of their crew are alive today because human sailors flew a survey vessel into a live minefield and carried them out by hand. She paused. And then someone prepared a false accusation before the event had even occurred and brought it to this council as evidence. The chamber was completely silent. We are asking for 3 things, Nora continued. The identity of whoever authored that report, a formal apology delivered to Lieutenant Commander Cole Briggs and the crew of the Ardent, and an Accord-level inquiry into this delegation's conduct, opened today. Zovan Tel moved to speak. His voice had lost its earlier warmth. It carried instead something harder and faster, the sound of a retreat trying to look like an advance. Nora looked at him with complete calm and said 4 words. We are not finished. She pressed the data chip a second time. A new file opened on the display, and the faces in the upper tiers, one by one, went pale. H1. We don't negotiate with murderers. H2. Part 4. What Humanity Remembered. The new file did not have a dramatic title. It did not have any title at all. It opened as a simple index, a numbered list of entries, each one tagged with a date, a location, a set of vessel or trade designations, and a reference classification. There were 63 entries on the list. Each one was a separate incident. And as the display expanded to fill the chamber's shared system, delegates in the upper tiers began reading through the index with the quiet, increasingly uncomfortable attention of people who recognized names and dates they did not expect to see in this room. Nora stood at the podium and let them read. Over the last 11 years, she said, Earth's Intelligence Division has been documenting a pattern of coordinated interference against human interests within the Accord framework. What you are looking at is not a collection of isolated incidents. It is a record of a deliberate, sustained campaign. Individually, each entry looked like a bureaucratic delay, a border misunderstanding, a trade irregularity, or a treaty interpretation that happened to go against us. Together, they tell a very different story. She spoke evenly, the way someone speaks who has rehearsed nothing because they don't need to. The man behind that index was named Director Owen Page. He ran Earth's Outer Intelligence Division from an unremarkable building in the outskirts of Baltimore, and he had spent the last 6 years building this file with the patience of someone who fully understood that the value of what he was collecting would only be realized if it was complete. Owen was not a flashy man. He had turned down 2 promotions to stay in the field analysis role he was good at. He wore the same style of reading glasses he had bought 12 years ago and replaced 6 times. He drank too much tea and went home every evening to a house where he kept a garden that his neighbors thought was too orderly. He had known about the Vethry campaign for 4 years. He had let it continue for 4 years, because stopping it early, before the pattern was fully documented, would have given the Accord's bad actors time to adjust, cover, and deny. Catching it in motion, collecting every thread, waiting until the picture was whole, that was how you built something that couldn't be argued away. What Nora was releasing into the council chamber was the complete picture. Entry 7 was a trade license application for an outer colony agricultural processor, filed by Earth 6 years ago, and denied on procedural grounds by a council committee. The procedural grounds cited a regulation that, as the file showed, had been quietly amended by a Vethry-supported motion 4 days before Earth's application was submitted, specifically to create the grounds for the denial. The amendment had been buried inside a larger regulatory update, written in a subclause, and had never been formally debated. Entry 19 was a Border Patrol Corridor Agreement from 4 years ago, in which the Accord had required Earth to adjust its defensive patrol routes in the outer sector, ostensibly for navigation safety reasons. The adjusted routes, as Owen's team had mapped them, created a gap in Earth's outer sensor coverage exactly large enough for a small-scale smuggling or incursion operation to pass through undetected. 3 of the 6 council members who had voted for that adjustment had financial ties to shipping interests that operated in that region. Entry 31 was a petition for full voting rights on Accord infrastructure contracts, submitted by Earth's UPA 2 years ago. The petition had been formally received, formally tabled for review, and then quietly assigned to a subcommittee that had not met in 8 years and had no scheduled meeting date. Nora's team had requested the subcommittee session calendar 3 months ago as part of a routine inquiry and received in return a document that did not include a single entry. Entry 44 was something worse. It was a medical trade agreement, the kind that covered the licensing and transfer of pharmaceutical and treatment technology between member species. Earth had been negotiating for access to a specific Accord-approved tissue regeneration process for 7 years. That process had been successfully used to treat nerve injuries in 3 other species. It worked, with minor modifications, on human biology. The negotiations had stalled 8 times in 7 years. Owen's files showed that on 4 of those occasions, the stalling had been the result of direct communication between Accord negotiation staff and representatives of a V3-aligned commercial interest that held exclusive licensing on a competing and less effective human-compatible treatment. People had suffered for that one. Real people, with real injuries, who had waited for a treatment that existed and worked, while someone in the back halls of the Accord made sure the paperwork never cleared. The chamber had been quiet since the index appeared. Now it was a different kind of quiet, the kind that has weight in it. Dale watched. That was his job in this room, and he was good at it. He watched the Kethal representative make eye contact with no one, and adjust his ceremonial collar twice in the space of 3 minutes. He watched a Sullivan aide pass a physical note to his delegate, something people only did when they didn't trust the room's communication systems. He watched Vel Asso, the ancient Darok administrator, sit perfectly still with his hands flat on the rail in front of him, reading the display with an expression that Dale could not fully interpret, but that looked in some deep way like grief. And he watched Zovantel. The high speaker had stopped moving. He sat with the stillness of a being who had run a calculation and found that every possible response made things worse. His aides were murmuring at his side, and he was not responding to them. He was staring at the display, and his face had the careful blankness of someone applying a great deal of effort to showing nothing. Nora let the index stay on the display for 3 full minutes. Then she spoke. 3 of the 9 council species participated in elements of this campaign in varying degrees. The Vethri led it. 2 others provided support through procedural cooperation and selective information management. She paused. We are not going to name the 2 supporting parties in this session. That is a matter we are prepared to handle separately and quietly, if those parties choose to engage with us in good faith going forward. Another pause, shorter this time. We are going to name the Vethri delegation, because what they did goes beyond political maneuvering. They sent their own people into a minefield with a pre-written false accusation ready to deploy. 17 of their crew died. 6 more would have died if Cole Briggs had not gone in after them. And then they brought that accusation here and asked this council to destroy an innocent man. She looked up. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. We don't negotiate with murderers, she said. We don't apologize to them. We don't hand our people over to them. And we do not, under any circumstances, pretend that what they did to humanity over the last 11 years was paperwork and misunderstanding. She pressed the chip one more time, and a final document appeared on the display. A formal Accord procedure request for inquiry, structured precisely according to the Accord's own legal framework, referencing the specific regulatory codes that the evidence violated. It was 40 pages long. It had been reviewed by 3 human legal scholars and 1 retired Accord administrative officer, who had left the council 6 years ago under quiet circumstances, and had, apparently, been keeping notes. We are requesting a full independent tribunal, Nora said. We are submitting this evidence in its entirety, and we are asking this council, the members of it who have acted in good faith, to look at what has been done in their name and decide what kind of institution they want to be. She stepped back from the podium. Dale had been in rooms where powers shifted before. He had felt it in fleet command centers when a battle turned, in treaty halls when a negotiation cracked, in briefing rooms when the wrong number appeared on the right screen. He knew what it felt like, that particular very specific moment when the balance tipped and everyone in the room felt it at the same time, even if no one said anything. It felt like this. In the upper gallery, the noise of 100 quiet conversations had started and stopped and started again. Across the arc of council seats, 7 of the 9 delegations were in various states of urgent internal discussion. One of the Accord's junior administrative staff had stood up from her post and was walking quickly toward the chamber's side corridor with a communicator pressed to her ear. Veloso raised one hand. "This session is in recess," he said. It was the first time in the session he had spoken without his voice being entirely steady. H1. We don't negotiate with murderers. H2. Part 5. The Reckoning. The recess lasted 4 hours. Then it lasted another 6. Then Veloso sent a formal message to all delegations, informing them that the session would reconvene the following morning. Nora and Dale went back to their quarters. She made tea. He sat on the small couch and stared at the ceiling for a while. Outside the viewport, Velkar's outer ring turned slowly in the dark, the same as it always did, indifferent to what was happening inside it. Ships came and went. Running lights blinked in long, patient rhythms. The galaxy was not holding its breath. It was simply continuing, the way it always did, while the small bright moments of consequence played out inside the stations and ships and council chambers that dotted its edges. "Do you think any of them are going to push back?" Dale asked. Nora thought about it honestly. "Some of them will try," she said. "Not the Vethri. They have nothing left to push with. But one or two of the others might attempt a procedural argument. Question the chain of evidence. Ask for an independent authentication of the metadata analysis." She sipped her tea. "It won't matter. The relay buoy data is authenticated by the Accord's own infrastructure. You can't question that without questioning the system they've used to run navigation law for 4 centuries. Dale nodded slowly. "So it's over." "The argument is over," she said. "The consequences aren't. Those will take time." She was right about that. The session reconvened the next morning, and it did not look like the session that had opened the day before. The chamber felt different, tighter, more careful, like a room where everyone had spent the night making decisions about where they stood. 3 delegations had requested private meetings with the human embassy before the session opened. Nora had acknowledged the requests and told them all the same thing. Human representatives would meet with any delegation that wished to speak, after the formal proceedings were complete. Not before. Doing it before would have looked like negotiating. Nora was not negotiating. Veloso opened the session and immediately recognized a motion from the floor. It came from the Kethal delegation, one of the species Nora had not named publicly, and it was a motion to formally receive the human evidence package into the Accord's official record and open a preliminary inquiry. The motion passed 7-1. The Vethri delegation cast the single opposing vote. The 9th delegation abstained, which was, in its own way, a statement. Zovan Tel requested the floor to speak. Veloso granted it, and the High Speaker stood and delivered a careful, measured statement in which he expressed that the Vethri delegation had full confidence in the Accord's processes and welcomed a transparent inquiry. His voice was steady. His face was still. There was nothing in his words that could be directly used against him. There was also nothing in them that anyone in the chamber believed. Nora listened to it without any expression at all. The independent tribunal was formally convened within the week. A panel of 3. 1 senior Accord legal officer from a non-involved species, 1 retired diplomatic judge from the Sullivan system, and 1 human legal representative named Carol Finch, who had spent 18 years doing exactly this kind of work, and had the reputation of a woman who slept very well at night because she never left loose ends, was assembled and given full access to Owen Page's intelligence archive. Owen himself traveled to Velkarath to present his evidence in person. He sat at the witness position in the tribunal chamber with his hands folded on the table, and answered every question put to him in the same quiet, unhurried voice he used for everything. When the lead tribunal officer asked him why Earth had continued to allow the campaign to proceed for 6 years after first detecting it, Owen looked at her steadily and said, "Because partial evidence can be argued away. Complete evidence cannot." He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Because, to him, it was. The inquiry took 11 weeks. At the end of it, the V3 delegation was formally suspended from council participation, pending a full review of their conduct. 2 Accord administrative staff members from separate species were identified as having facilitated elements of the trade interference campaign and were removed from their posts. One of them resigned before the formal removal order was issued. The other filed an objection that was processed, reviewed, and denied within 8 days. Cole Briggs and the full crew of the EFS Ardent were formally exonerated by the Accord Council in a chamber session. The same chamber where just a few months earlier, the accusation against them had been laid out with such satisfied certainty. The exoneration resolution passed unanimously. Even the V3's temporary replacement delegate voted for it, which was widely understood as the new administration in V3 space trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and what Zovantel had done. Cole was promoted to full commander. He received the news via secure comm while docked at a fuel station on the far edge of the Outer Rim, and responded with a message that read, in its entirety, "Appreciated. Request leave approved. Wanna get home." Leave was approved. He went home to Spokane. He spent 3 weeks doing very little, which he had earned completely. The political work that followed the tribunal was in many ways more important than the tribunal itself. This was where Nora lived, in the long, detailed, unglamorous work of turning a moment of leverage into something that would last. She drafted a new framework for human participation in the Accord. She did not call it a demand document or a reform proposal. She called it a standing offer, and she sent it to every delegation with a cover note that was 2 sentences long. This is what equal partnership looks like. We are ready to build it with anyone who is. The framework called for full sovereign trade rights for Earth and its colonies, unobstructed access to the patrol corridors Earth needed to maintain its outer defensive network, equal standing in treaty arbitration so that human petitions could no longer be buried in committees that didn't meet, and a formal review of all licensing agreements in which human access to technology had been restricted during the period covered by Owen Page's inquiry. 41 of the Accord's 57 member species signed within 60 days. Several more signed within the following month. The holdouts were, for the most part, species whose trade interests had benefited from the old arrangement, and who needed time to recalculate. They signed eventually. They signed because the evidence that had been released into the public Accord record made the cost of not signing, in terms of reputation and alliance value, significantly higher than the cost of adjusting their trade expectations. They signed, as Dale put it to Nora one evening, because they'd done the math. Nora did not celebrate in any visible way. She drafted the next round of follow-up correspondence. She scheduled the implementation meetings. She reviewed the technical language of 3 subclauses in the trade rights agreement that she felt were slightly too vague and would cause problems in 18 months, if not tighten now. She had been doing this long enough to know that the moment after you won something was exactly the wrong moment to stop paying attention. Dale, for his part, spent an afternoon standing at a viewport watching Accord patrol ships adjusting their routes in the outer lanes, moving, quietly and without announcement, away from the corridors that sat along human space. Nobody had formally ordered it yet. The implementation calendar was still being finalized. But somewhere in the navigational operations of 3 separate species, someone had looked at the new reality of the situation and made a practical decision. He watched them shift course for a while. Then he pulled out his communicator and called Nora. "Patrol adjustments have started," he said, informally, before the official implementation date. "I know," she said. She sounded like she was still typing. "Does that tell you something?" "It tells me they believe it's real." "That's what you're watching. Not ships moving. Belief moving." He thought about that for a moment. Do you think they'll try something like this again? A few years down the road, when the memory fades a little? Nora was quiet for a moment. not because she didn't have an answer, but because she was giving it the weight it deserved. Probably, she said, there will always be someone who thinks they found the angle we haven't covered. Someone who looks at humans and still sees what they want to see instead of what's there. A brief pause. But they'll think about it a lot longer next time. And thinking about it longer means talking about it more. And talking about it more means more people who know about it before it starts. And more people who know about it before it starts means it leaks, Dale said. Means it leaks, she agreed. Dale nodded at the stars, at the ships adjusting their routes, at the slow and turning station that had witnessed in its long neutral life a great many moments of consequence and would witness many more. Good enough, he said. Outside, the patrol ships finished their adjustments and settled into their new headings. The running lights blinked on in the dark, steady and patient, the way lights do when they are no longer marking a threat, but simply a presence, a reminder, quiet and persistent, that something was out there, and it was paying attention. It had always been paying attention. That, in the end, was the thing that the Accord had never quite understood about humanity. Not because the information wasn't available, but because they had decided, somewhere in their 400 years of certainty, that they already knew what they were looking at. They had learned better now. It had cost them more than they expected. It always did.